you will see when you first hit the URL, so to speak, to access the time and expense report system. In the upper left-hand corner is the area for employees. If you notice, this top link right here is to enter your timesheet or expense report. That is going to take you to this login screen. Do you guys see the login screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So you're going to enter your username and a password and the system name, which will be provided to you. Once you enter the applicable login information, you're just going to simply click on login. This is going to take you directly into the time and expense system. The system is currently set to default to your timesheet. So to access the expense authorization and expense report area, you can simply click on the top, what we refer to as the breadcrumb path. Just click on time and expense, and then you can go to expense, and then you have the two options for expense authorizations and expense reports. So as everybody knows, the majority of you are required to enter an expense authorization prior to going on company travel. So we're going to go ahead and go to expense authorization. I'm going to go to manage expense authorization. And that's going to pull up the expense authorization screen for you. The system is going to default to the current date. And it's also going to provide you with the different expense report types that you are currently authorized to select. So if you notice in my drop down here, I have my CONUS and OCONUS because this is a travel expense authorization. And that's why I don't see another option for something like a non-travel expense report. And I will show you the non-travel expense report when we go over to the expense report area. In the event that you are going to be on extended travel, you do have the option also to set this as a blanket authorization. And what that means is that you might be submitting multiple expense reports against that particular expense authorization. If you notice, there are some fields over here that have a red asterisk. That lets you know that those are required fields. So the system is not going to allow you to go to the next screen or the next step in the expense authorization process until all of those required fields have data in those. So for testing purposes only, I'm going to be using the word test. I do that so that anybody that goes into the system after me knows that those are test records and should not be exported out for processing. If you notice also, the default here is the first day of the trip and the last day of the trip. Both of those boxes are checked. That's going to help the system be able to accurately calculate the per diem rate based off of the per diem schedule. On the first and last day of travel, you would be reimbursed 75% of the overall allowed M&IE for that area. You do have a calendar over here next to each of those date fields. So you can simply click on that calendar, and then you can go ahead and select the date when you're going to be leaving for your travel, and then the date that you expect to return. You're also going to want to provide a purpose for the trip. This just assists your manager who is reviewing and approving the expense authorization have a good understanding of the reason why you are requesting to go on travel or have a need to travel. Next, you're going to click on the locations tab. So each of these tabs up here, the purpose, location, and default charges, these three tabs do all need to be populated. Those are required areas to complete the header of the expense authorization. So I'm going to go ahead and click on locations, and that's going to open up that location subtask. To add the location where you're traveling to, simply click on the add location field here. And if you notice, that does open up another subtask window for you. You also, again, have those red stars over here on the left-hand side, just to assist you in which fields are required. When it comes to the country, the state, and the city, you can also start typing in where you're going to for each of those fields. And the system is going to provide you with a list that matches those characters or those keystrokes. So I'm going to go ahead and select United States. And in this case, let's say we're going to go to Florida. Same thing is going to hold true for the city. You can either start typing in the letters Or if you prefer, you can also do a lookup by clicking on the magnifying glass on the far right-hand side. And that's going to provide you with an alphabetical list of the cities. If you know that you're going to Orlando, you can always go in and do a query and just enter the letter O and do a find, and the system is going to, again, provide you with the options for all cities within the state of Florida that start with the letter O. The system will auto-populate the county for you, so you don't need to worry about that. You also have an area over here that says select favorite location. So if this is a location that you're going to be traveling to on a regular basis, you do have the ability to add that location to your favorite. And if you notice here in my drop down, I've got Denver, Colorado has already been added to my favorites. The nice thing about adding your frequent locations to your favorites is it gives you the ability to select them from this drop down list instead of having to come over here and enter those the country, the state, and the city field. So it is definitely a little bit of a time saver, if you will. Once you've entered the applicable information, you're going to simply hit apply in the bottom right-hand corner. If this is a location you're going to travel to on a regular basis and you have decided you'd like to add that to your favorites, you can simply highlight this line and click add to favorites. Then the next time you go into this locations tab, you're also going to see the Denver, Colorado, which was already there, and you'll also see the Orlando, Florida location. The next tab is going to be your default charges. This is going to be the charge code that is going to incur the cost for this particular trip. So this is very similar to your timesheet. You're going to hit the magnifying glass on the far right-hand side. That's going to open up your company's charge tree. The easiest way to locate your charge codes is to come over here and do a query and a find. And the system is going to provide you with a list of all of the charge codes that you have access to. And then you can select the one that you would be charging this trip to. To add that charge code to the expense authorization, you can highlight the line and hit select. Or if you prefer, you can also highlight the line and double click. Either way will add that charge code. One thing I do want to point out is before you can start adding the planned expenses, you do need to save the header information of the expense authorization. And the header information is going to be the purpose, the locations, and the default charges. So once you've completed those three tabs, go ahead and save that header or the expense authorization by either clicking on save in the far left or just to the right of that button, you also have save and continue. Either one will save that record for you. The next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to add the planned expenses. Please be aware that this is going to provide an estimate for the trip. That doesn't mean that you need to enter every single potential expense. The one thing that I would recommend is that you look at the items that are high dollar. That's going to be your transportation from point A to point B, your lodging, your meals, and a car rental if you anticipate needing to rent a car while you're on that particular trip. I wouldn't say that you necessarily would need to enter, $20 for tolls or $20 for a night of parking at the airport. That's totally up to you guys. Just keep in mind that this is an estimate, so you at a minimum want to include those high dollar expenses. To add a planned expense, you're simply going to click on Add Planned Expense. And if you notice, the cursor now is defaulted over to the category field. You're going to do a lookup here, and I'm going to select transportation. And then you're going to do the same thing for the expense type. You're going to do a lookup for the expense type, and then go ahead and click the applicable one. If you notice down here at the bottom, again, you've got those red asterisks letting you know that those are required fields. The next thing that the system is asking is that I provide an estimate for my airfare. So you could always go on to Expedia or Travelocity and just kind of get a ballpark idea for what the airfare is running for the dates that you anticipate traveling. You also have a comment field over here, so you have an option. This is a freeform text field. If you have any additional information that you want to enter in here, this gives you the ability to do that as well. And then you also want to just click on charge allocations. The things you want to look for on this charge allocation tab is you want to make sure that the charge type field is populated, make sure that the project is populated, and as long as the charge type field is populated, then the account field will populate. If this field is blank, you're going to want to do a lookup by clicking on that magnifying glass on the far right and make the applicable selection. If when you do a lookup here, there's no options to select, please reach out to the expense administrator so that they can assist you. It could be that possibly you've selected the wrong charge code. There's a couple of different things that can cause that to happen. So just know that that would not allow you to continue if you don't have anything in this particular field. So I've added my airfare. I'm going to go ahead and add my lodging and my meals for this upcoming travel. I'm going to go ahead and click on Add Planned Expenses again. I'm just going to hit the forward key to go to the next blank screen. And in this case, again, I'm going to do a lookup. I'm going to select my lodging, and then I'm going to come over here to my expense type. And if you notice, I have options here. I have an option for lodging. I have one for lodging that is approved if that lodging rate is over per diem. And you also have a unapproved over per diem lodging. So it could be possibly that you're going to a conference and you know that the hotel is going to cost more than what you're allowed. You just want to identify in that case if that over per diem cost has been approved or unapproved. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and select lodging here. And if you notice, as soon as I selected lodging in the expense type, I also have the per diem rate field here. So if I click on this, this is going to give me a breakout of my total per diem. So I have $127 a night that is allowed for my lodging. This $127 is only the room rate. That does not include any taxes or hotel or resort property fees that are going to get tacked onto that room cost. You also notice that my total M&IE is $66. This $66 is comprised of $16 for breakfast, the $17 for lunch, your $28 for dinner, and $5 for incidentals. The majority of states and locations that you travel to, the incidentals are going to be $5. There are a couple of states where you might see that to be substantially higher. That's going to be somewhere like Hawaii, where the incidentals are like $30 a day, because that's obviously a high cost area to go visit. So I'm going to just go ahead and close that per diem subtask. And if you notice, the system has already calculated the number of nights here. So I'm going to be staying at the hotel the 23rd and the 24th. I plan on checking out the 25th. In the event that you have a red-eye departure and you're not sure what time you're going to be checking out of the hotel, and it's always possible that you would incur an additional night of cost, even though you're not staying. You do want to check with your hotel when you check in to see what the cutoff time is. And if you do anticipate having that late checkout, you can always click this box. And if you notice, the system is going to increase the number of nights from 2 to 3. And then if I uncheck it again, it's going to drop it back down. The system is going to auto calculate my estimated lodging for me based off of that per diem schedule. So again, looking at this per diem schedule, this is $127 a night. So the system took the 127 multiplied by the number of nights, and that's how it comes up with the $254. Again, you're just going to want to do a double check on that charge allocation just to validate that the charge type field is populated and that the project field is also populated there for you. If you notice, when I am going to get ready to add another planned expense, you do need to click back on this expense details tab, and that's going to take you back to this screen so you can add additional expenses. And again, you've got that free form text field down here for any additional comments that you might want to provide. So I'm going to just go ahead and click on Add Planned Expenses one more time. And this time we're going to go ahead and add our meals. So I'm going to do a lookup here. I'm going to select my M&IE. I'm going to come over to the expense type. And again, you're going to have options, direct meals or overhead meals. I'm going to select the direct meals, which will, again, validate against the per diem schedule. And again, the system's going to auto calculate that amount for me. So it's going to look at the total M&IE allowed for that location times the number of days, and that's how it's going to calculate that $165. So we'll go back to our charge allocations tab. And again, you can see the charge type is populated, the project is populated, and since the charge type is populated, the account is also provided. So those are going to be my top 3 expenses. Again, if you are planning on renting a rental car, that would be another expense that I would recommend that you add, or if you anticipate any other large dollar cost. You know, again, not worrying about mileage from from house to airport, those sorts of things, but definitely get the majority of the costs in the expense authorization, because those are going to be committed costs to that project. So it's going to help project managers be able to manage their project and have a good feel for how much that overall, the overall cost for that trip once the expense report has been submitted. So once you've added all of your planned expenses, you're going to want to, again, go ahead and save this expense authorization by clicking on Save and Continue. And then the next step is going to be to submit the expense authorization. Just please keep in mind, for those of you on the call that are project managers or supervisors and managers, the expense authorization is an estimate to the cost. The only time this is going to hit the general ledger is if the employee has requested an advance. If somebody does need to request an advance, there's an advance subtask down here in the bottom right corner. I'm just going to open up that screen for you. And then you would just simply click on New, and then you're going to enter the amount, the date, and the reason why you need that advance. I'm going to go ahead and close that subtask. Before you submit your expense authorization, you do want to do one final review just to ensure that you've selected the right charge code, you've selected the right location that you're going to, and that you have included the majority of the expenses that you anticipate to incur. Once you have reviewed the expense authorization and you're ready to submit that expense authorization, you can simply click on Submit. You will always receive this message window that just indicates that by signing this expense authorization, you're certifying that that the expenses will be incurred on the charge in the day specified, and that you've recorded that information in accordance with your company's policies and procedures. If you are not familiar with your company's travel policy, please be sure to reach out to your supervisor so that they can provide you with that guidance so that you are sure that you are following what is required by you as an employee. As soon as I click OK on this message, that's going to change the status of my expense authorization from draft to submitted. So if I click on the status here, if you notice, this is the workflow. You see, I've got 2 tasks that are highlighted in green. That lets me know that those tasks have been completed. So I've created the expense authorization, I've submitted the expense authorization, and then this line down here that's yellow, this is a pending task, and that's for my test supervisor to come in and approve this expense authorization. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. And I'm going to show the approval process on the expense report side. Just know that it's going to be exactly the same on the expense authorization or the expense report. So we're going to walk through all of the steps that the employee would take to submit the expense authorization and the expense report. And then I'll come circle back once we complete the expense report and do the approval by accessing the workflow. So let's say we've taken our trip, we're back and we're ready to submit our expense report. So I'm going to just click on expense. I'm going to come right over here to expense report, and I'm going to come over to manage expense report. So this screen looks quite a bit different than the expense authorization. And the reason is because this is actually considered the wizard mode. And this is actually going to make it a lot easier for you guys to be able to complete your expense report. It's going to walk you through the steps that you need to take to complete that expense report. So what the system does is it's going to look at that expense authorization. It's going to bring over the purpose, and I'm just going to click on this so you can see I have a purpose here. This was just a test that I did for August 18th, and then the default charges, and that is also already populated. And that's why I've got these check marks over here on the far left-hand side. So in this case, I'm actually going to create a new expense report so that you can see. Oops, I'm in the wrong screen. Sorry, let me just come back here. I'm going to go to a new expense report. And the reason I wanted to create a new one so that you can see how to select the expense authorization to be associated with the expense report. So the screen that I just showed you lets you know that that's the information that's going to come over from the expense authorization to the expense report. And if you notice, the planned expenses did not come over. So you do need to come back in and claim those expenses at the actual cost incurred amount. So again, the system is going to default to the current day. You've got those red asterisks letting you know which fields are required. And you're going to have a drop down here for the expense authorizations that you currently have that have been approved and are waiting for an expense report to be associated with them. So I'm going to just go ahead and select that expense authorization. You can see this was for August 13th through August 14th. I've got my purpose, so if you want to add any additional information in here, you can. And this is going to pull over the expense report type from that expense authorization. And if you notice in the bottom right-hand corner, I have a continue button. These are always going to be highlighted in green, so it's going to make it easy for you to step through the process to complete your expense report. So I'm going to go ahead and say continue. And in this trip, I actually went to San Francisco, so you can see it brought that location over for me. So I don't need to do anything here unless I want to look at those per diem rates one more time. You can also, click on the view here and it's going to open up that per diem. That'll help you as you go in and record your incurred expenses, especially when it comes to the lodging amount. So I'm going to close that subtask. So for this screen, really all you're doing is just validating that this information is still correct. You're going to go ahead and hit continue. The same thing is going to hold true for these default charges. This screen, you just want to validate that this is the right charge code. And that's just going to kind of walk you through the process of making sure that, number one, you've selected the correct expense authorization for the expense report that you're getting ready to submit. Once you've validated the location and the default charges, you're going to go ahead and hit Save Report. If you remember, when I did the expense authorization, I indicated that you needed to save the header of the expense authorization before you could continue to the expense report. And I'm not quite sure why I was getting that error. So let me just delete this line here. Okay, so now we are ready to enter our claimed expenses. So this process is going to be very similar to adding planned expenses for the expense authorizations. The big difference that you're going to see in the wizard mode for the expense report is that you don't have to select the category and the expense type. So this is going to take you directly to the expense type option. You can do a lookup here. And if you notice when you do a lookup, you've got all of these categories in here, as well as the expense type. So I'm going to come down here and select my airfare. I'm going to hit continue in the bottom right corner. And if you notice, it still has my dates in here, and this is not the right expense report. So I apologize. Let me just get out of here real quick. And let me grab this one. Okay, so now we will come in and add our claimed expenses. Come over here to our lodging. And then I'm going to hit continue in the bottom right corner. Here's my trip to San Francisco, California. This was checking in August 13th, checking out August 14th. Again, in the event that you had to check out late and you incurred that additional night, you can go ahead and check this box, and that'll increase the number of nights from 1 to 2. So all you're doing in this screen is just validating the information, making sure that the dates are correct. And if you notice, it also is going to provide you with that location. So it's another way to ensure that you are selecting the correct expense report, especially if you started one and then you had to stop and come back and complete it. As you noticed when I was doing this, it's very easy to accidentally select the wrong one. So you are going to want to kind of pay attention as you go along to make sure that you're selecting the correct one. We're going to go ahead and hit continue down here in the bottom right corner, and the system is going to open up the lodging. So I'm going to go ahead and enter my room rate. And again, remember, the room rate on the per diem schedule does not include taxes or fees. I'm just going to go ahead and enter a tax rate. If I had multiple nights here, I would be able to copy this information to additional nights. And to do that, I would be able to do a right click here, and you're going to have two different options. It's going to give you an option to copy to the next night or copy to remaining nights. Also, if you are staying at the hotel for an additional night for personal reasons, and you've got 4 or 5 nights of hotel, and one of those is for personal, you will want to check this personal box here. That'll subtract the cost for that night of stay so that you're not reimbursed for those. You're going to go ahead and say continue down here in the bottom right corner. And then the next screen is where you are actually going to select the payment method, whether it was paid by the employee or if it was put on a company credit card. And then you're also going to enter the expense amount incurred. So I'm just going to say that my airfare was $300. Actually, this isn't airfare, this is lodging, I apologize. And if you notice, it's going to give me the ceiling amount, which was a $362.40, which is the per diem allowable for that expense. I'm going to go ahead and hit continue in the bottom right corner. And again, this is where you would normally click on that charge allocation tab. And if you notice, I see my expense charge type, I see my amount, and I also see my project. So all of the information that I would expect to see here, I can see. I'm going to go ahead and hit continue in the bottom right corner. And this is where I would come in to attach my receipts. So Teams is a little different, you guys. So in order to attach my receipts, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to go grab my temporary receipt file, and then I'll share my screen again so that you guys can see attaching the receipt process. So give me just a second. I'm doing this all on my laptop. I don't have multiple screens at the moment, which is why we are kind of going back and forth just a little bit. So I appreciate your patience. Okay, so to attach the receipt, you're going to click on attach here. You're going to come over here to file. I'm going to come over here to my sample receipts. This is my lodging, so I'm just going to select my hotel sample receipt and simply click on upload. As soon as the file is attached to the record, it's going to check this little box right here that says that that has been attached. If you ever want to view that attachment, you have the ability to do that by clicking the view. And if you notice also, it's going to provide you with a file name. So before you go on to the next step, just make sure that you've attached the right receipt to the right expense. So if I wanted to view this, I could simply go to view. It's going to open up a window down here at the bottom, and you can click on open, and it's going to pull that receipt up for you so that you can look at that if you need to. Okay. Once you've done that and you validated that the correct receipt has been attached to that expense, you also want to make sure that the receipts are legible. Next is you are going to click Save Expense in the bottom right-hand corner. And if you notice, the system takes you right back to be able to add the additional claimed expenses. So I've got my lodging in here. I'm going to go ahead and go back to add claimed expense. And this time I'm going to select my transportation. Again, I'm going to say continue. Just validate that the dates are correct. Again, you've got the opportunity to enter any additional comments here that you would like to. We're going to hit continue in the bottom right corner. And then again, you're going to select the payment method. You're going to select the amount for your airfare. And then say continue in the bottom right corner. Again, just validate the information here, making sure that that charge type field is populated and you're not in a situation where you need to select the charge type. Once you validate that, you're going to hit continue again in the bottom right corner. And again, we're going to come in and attach our receipt. This time we will be attaching our airline and click upload. In the event that you are missing a receipt, you can check this missing box. Just know that if you're missing the receipt, you will be required to provide a reason as to why that receipt is missing. When it comes to your airfare and your lodging, generally those are emailed to you. So you should be able to find those in your email. And the good thing is those are generally always legible as well. If you want to view the receipt again, you can do that like I showed you earlier by checking on the view. I'm going to just go ahead and say save expense. And then we're going to add one additional expense here, and that's going to be our meals. So we're going to, again, come back to the add claimed expense. We're going to do a lookup here. I'm going to select my M&IE. I'm going to hit my continue. And if you notice, the system is going to pull in the location because it's going to validate the per diem rate against the location that I've traveled to. And again, you have the ability to view that per diem rate schedule here to see how much you're allowed for each individual meal with your total reimbursement expectation of $76 a day, keeping in mind that it's 75% on the first and the last day of travel. So because this was only one overnight stay, this expense report is only for 2 days. So I would be getting 75% for both of those days. I'm going to go ahead and say continue in the bottom right corner. And now I have to claim the meals that I'm going to request reimbursement for. So the system is going to default to check all of the meals as well as the incidentals. That means that you're claiming all of those meals. In the event that you had a meal provided for you, somebody took you to lunch, somebody bought you dinner, make sure that you uncheck that meal that you did not pay for so that you are not reimbursed for something that you shouldn't be. So let's say that I got to San Francisco and that my customer took me out for dinner. If you notice, when I unchecked that dinner, it reduced my per diem reimbursement amount. So initially it was $114. I unchecked that and it's going to reduce it down to $88.50. So once you've updated the meals that you're claiming, generally incidentals would always be claimed for every day that you're traveling. You're going to go ahead and hit continue in the bottom right corner. And again, you do need to select a payment method here. And this is going to be employee paid. And then you're just going to say continue in the bottom right corner. Again, this is where you're going to validate that charge type just in case you need to select something different and this field is empty or not populated. And then we're going to hit continue in the bottom right corner. And in this case, I'm just going to say missing because this is per diem. So with per diems, you really wouldn't need a receipt. And I apologize, I meant to go in and remove that setting and I forgot. So I'm just going to say receipt not required. If I could spell today, that would probably be helpful. I personally, and this is just my personal preference, anytime I was missing a receipt, I always used capital letters, not because I wanted to yell at somebody about it, but I just felt like it stood out a little bit better, especially when it comes to auditing. So keep in mind that your expense reports are also auditable records. which is one of the reasons why I've mentioned a couple of times about making sure that your receipts are legible, because in the event that your expense report gets pulled for an audit, we'll want to make sure that the auditors can read the receipts associated with those individual expenses. And as you guys can imagine, your accounts payable area has a lot of expense reports to process. So anything that the users can do to assist with that and get your expense report processed in a more timely fashion, I know they would appreciate that as well. So again, this does have a view option here, even though I'm not attaching a receipt. My next option is to go ahead and save that expense. So just like on the expense authorization, you want to review your expense report and the items that you have claimed to ensure that you have included everything. I don't know if you guys travel, if you put all of your receipts in a folder or what have you, just go through whatever receipts you have, make sure that you've accounted for everything. Don't forget to do your mileage from your home to the airport if that is something that you're allowed to claim as well. You also have the ability, if you need to edit an expense before you submit it, say you accidentally entered $300 here and it was actually $350, I could come in and highlight that line and click edit expense and then go in and make any changes that I needed to. Okay. So I have reviewed my expenses. I'm confident that the receipts that I have attached to this expense report are legible and it is the correct receipts for each of those expense lines. My next step is to click submit. If you notice on the expense authorization, the submit was in the upper left corner. In the wizard mode, you really want to just pay attention to those buttons at the bottom that are highlighted in green, letting you know the next step. So I'm going to go ahead and click submit. I'm going to say continue. And then this, instead of getting the pop-up window, you're just going to see this wording right here, which is the same information that you saw in that little pop-up message that just indicates that by signing the expense report, you are certifying that those costs were incurred on the day that you incurred them and that you are charging them to the charge code that they should be going to, and that you have completed and submitted your expense report in accordance with your company's policies and procedures. If you notice, the status of my expense report currently shows draft. As soon as I click on I agree and say update report, that's going to change the status of that expense report to submitted. So this is my expense report that's submitted here. I'm going to just bring this back up so you guys can see it. I'm going to click on the submitted status, and this is where you can see all of the tasks that are pending. So again, anything highlighted in green lets me know that those tasks have been completed, and now I have additional tasks that are pending by another user. In this case, it's my test supervisor, and that's why those tasks are highlighted in yellow. So I'm going to just go ahead and close this. And that is actually completes how to enter an expense authorization, how to enter an expense report. So I'm going to just exit out of the system for just a second. And I'm going to log back in as my test supervisor so that we can go through those approvals. Again, the system does open directly to your timesheet. So I'm just going to come back over here to time and expense. I'm going to click on expense. I'm going to go to expense reports, and I'm going to go to manage approve expense reports. I also have another option. If I wanted to, I could come over here to manage my desktop. And this is a really nice way to allow the system to kind of navigate for you, if you will. Your Manage My Desktop is going to provide you with all of the tasks that are pending action by you. So you can see that I have an expense authorization that's pending approval. And if I click on expense report, I also have an expense report pending approval. So if I wanted to launch these tasks from here, I could simply click on launch, And that is actually a hyperlink over to the Manage Approve Expense Report area. So I'm going to just go ahead and launch this task. And you can see this is the breadcrumb path to get to that screen. So if you would rather not launch it from the desktop, you can also come in here, change the filter by to status. You are going to need to select your functional role. Some of you might have multiple functional roles. And in this case, you can either enter the last name or you can just do a search based off of this status criteria here. And you can click the lightning bolt up here at the top, and it's going to provide you with any records that are in either a submitted or an under review status. So here's the expense report that was pending approval. To access the workflow, you can again simply click on the submitted or the status, and you see these lines that are highlighted in yellow. And so you're going to highlight that line, and then you're going to say perform selected task. So now it puts that under review. I'm just going to go ahead and do these ones real quick, and then we'll do the final approval. And then the actual approval for the primary supervisor is down here at the bottom. And again, it's going to be the same option to perform the selected task or reject the selected task. As a supervisor or manager, I do want to point out that you should also review those receipts just to make sure that the employee attached the correct receipt to the correct line and that they're legible. And to do that, you can simply highlight the line, just look at the status where it says attached, and then you can come over here to view, and the system will open up that file down here at the bottom for you. And if you click on open and allow, and I don't know if you guys can see this or not, since it's kind of shifting screens, but it'll bring up that receipt for you to give you the opportunity to review that, just to ensure that there aren't any problems with that attachment. So I'm going to come back down here to my approval line, and again, just click the perform selected task. If for some reason you find an error on the expense report as you go through and review it, you would want to reject the expense report by selecting the reject selected task. And you will be required to provide a brief explanation as to what is not correct on that expense report. Please make sure that you're specific enough to give the employee enough information so they can go in and make those necessary corrections and get that corrected, re-signed, and resubmitted so you can go in and review it again. So in this case, I'm just going to say perform selected task. When you are approving the records, you will see this message window that comes up that just indicates that by approving the expense reports, that you are certifying that those expenses were incurred on the charge in the day and they were completed and submitted in accordance with your company's policies and procedures. Just like on the when the employee signed, as soon as you hit OK, that's going to change the status of that expense report. So that expense report is now in the approved status. If I just wanted to go in and validate that, I could change the status to approved. I can hit the lightning bolt, and then any expense reports that are in approved status for anybody that's under my group that I have a functional rollover is going to populate in here. You can isolate those by last name if you want to, or if you're looking for expense reports for a certain date, you can also enter a start and an end date. Okay. So that walks you through expense authorizations, expense reports, creating and submitting, as well as approving. The approval process for the expense authorizations are going to be exactly the same as what they are for the expense report. I can launch that from here if you want to. I just find that it's a little bit easier because it's going to bring you straight to that record. And then I can go ahead and look at that expense authorization. And then I can come down and approve it.
Claire, this is Krista.
Hi, Krista.
Do you mind just quickly starting an expense report that would be non-travel related?
Sure, no problem. So again, we're going to come back over here to our manage expense report. Let me just close out of here. It's not letting me, Krista. Let me come over here. Okay, sorry. If you come over here to the type, you're going to select the local miscellaneous. If you notice when I did that, let me just come back here for just a second. So if I have this selected to the CONUS OCONUS, it's going to require that authorization because this is looking for an expense authorization to be associated with an overnight travel. For those of you that might be submitting out-of-pocket expenses without an overnight stay, you can come over here and select the local. Again, you will need to enter a brief description and then your dates. You might just have it for 1 day because it is an out-of-pocket expense. Again, you're going to want to enter a purpose, and you might have had to run out and pick something up for a meeting as an example. Go ahead and enter that information, hit continue in the bottom right-hand corner. This is going to take you directly to the charge codes. Again, you can do a lookup by selecting the magnifying glass. I do find it a lot easier just to do a query and a find so that it can bring up your options. Not quite sure why my charge code's not there. Krista, I don't know what's going on. That is really weird.
Try doing overhead.
I know why. I'm sorry. Hang on a second. I'm still in here as my supervisor. I disconnected it. I apologize, you guys. Let me just come back in as the employee. Okay. So again, we're going to select our local. I'm going to just enter test in here. I'm going to select today's date. We're going to hit continue in the bottom right corner. We're going to do a lookup for our charge code. Again, doing the query and the find just makes life so much easier. Go ahead and click the charge code that you are going to have that cost go to. Hit save report in the bottom right-hand corner. And then if you notice, it's going to automatically take you to the claimed expenses because you don't have to go in and select all of the other requirements that you would for a overnight expense report. So again, you're going to come straight to the expense type, and this is where you're going to see all of your different options to select. So I'm going to go ahead and select the G&A office supplies. I'm going to say continue, and then I've got comments in here. So I can come in here and just say items for board of director meeting and hit continue down at the bottom. Again, you're going to need to select the pay method. Transaction currency is going to default to US dollars. And then I'm just going to enter my expense amount, say that it was $55, and go ahead and hit continue. And again, if you notice, everything populates in for me. There's the $55. So you do have the ability to review that if you need to make a change. Maybe you meant to put in 65 instead of 55. You can hit the backwards key and make that correction. Again, you want to just ensure that that charge type field has been populated and as well as the project has been brought over. Hit continue in the bottom right corner. And again, you're going to be required to attach the receipt. If you are missing the receipt, you can just click on missing and then save that expense report. So just make sure that you don't do what I did. Make sure that you select the non-travel expense report on the far right-hand side before you go in, and that will disconnect you from the required expense authorization. Once you've added whatever out-of-pocket expenses you have, you can go ahead and submit the expense report. Hit continue in the bottom right. And again, you're going to see this message just reminding you that by signing this, you're certifying that the expenses were incurred on the day that you are claiming them, that they are recorded to the correct charge code, and that they are in compliance with your company's policies and procedures. Simply say agree and say update report. And that is now submitted. So if I open this back up and come over to the submitted, and if you notice, now it's waiting for the approval side. It's the employee has created and submitted. And if you notice this receipt, because this receipt is required, I marked it as missing. So it's going to highlight that in red. And that just lets anybody reviewing the expense report know that there's something that the system didn't expect. So it just kind of flags it because it's out of the normal, if you will. Okay.
Do you mind just going back to where they attach the receipt?
Sure. So if you wanted to attach a receipt here, you can go ahead and say attach. Again, it's going to open up this sub-task or sub-window, if you will. You can click on browse. I'll just attach a taxi receipt and say upload. And of course, let me go select another one. And if you notice, as soon as I attach the receipt, it changed that from red to green because now I am in compliance with the rules that the system is validating. So if you violate those rules, if you will, it will flag it in red. And then if you wanted to view that receipt, you could always click on that line that you've attached the receipt, and then you can go ahead and click on view. And that'll bring up that file that you've attached. Did you want to go to the home dashboard, Krista?
Yeah, I could do that. But just real quick, if you have a company credit card, during your wizard options here, after you hit add claim to expense and then click the expense type, it will bring up the options for your imported credit card charges so you can apply against the company card. And then one change in this system is you have to attach one receipt per expense. In the old system, you could attach kind of everything in one PDF, but in this system, you have to do one PDF per expense. And that's really just setting the system up so that we can eventually use it for mobile, the mobile app that's coming. And I don't know when that's coming. I just understand it's in the next year or so.
Yeah, the mobile app for cloud clients is currently slotted for the end of the first quarter of 2021. That's again the estimated release date. So it could definitely, it could obviously slip, but right now that's the target.
Yep. So I'll go ahead and take over the screen and just show you a couple tips from the home button. You can ignore my Skype there, but so everybody should have this home dashboard option. This is basically your dashboard for all your T&E items. So you have your tasks. These are things that you need to take care of. You have your own expense reports here. As you can see, I've been doing a lot of testing in the new system. Your own expense authorizations and their status, your timesheets, of course, your leave balances. If Patrick's on here, I really need to take some leave. And then this would be where any of your imported Visa transactions are. So this is your company paid item. So I have 2 on here that I need to record. So this is a good option if you want to use this for approving. So I have 3 expense reports that need approval. So if you click the blue hyperlink, it'll bring you to this dashboard that Claire was showing where you can hit launch. And then it'll bring you right into your outstanding tasks here. From here, as Claire was explaining, you'll go under status, and then it brings up the workflow. There we go. So the items in yellow are the items that are outstanding for me. I'm an AP person, so I have 2. But if you needed to come back in here, review something, or as a supervisor, you want to see an attachment, you find that line that says attached, highlight it, and then you can click view to see your receipt copies. So this one is just some sort of due-in membership. I think I saw another Claire, I might give you back the screen, but I saw another question about if you're a proxy. So do you want to just kind of share real quick about entering a proxy report, just where they need to go?
Yep. So if you are a proxy entering expense reports for others, and let me just share my screen again. So for those of you that are proxies, you would actually come over here to the Manage Approve Expense Reports. One thing I do want to point out is that the wizard mode is not available in the Manage Expense Reports. I'm sorry, in the Manage Approve Expense Reports. So this screen is going to look very similar to the expense authorization screen, where you will need to select the category and the expense type individually. Everything else, as far as creating a new expense report, if you're going to create it on behalf of another individual, this is going to default directly to your employee ID. So you will need to just delete these out of here, and then you're going to have a lookup, and you can come in and select the person that you need to enter the expense report for. Everything else is going to remain the same. The big difference is you have to come to the Manage Approve Expense Report area, and you will not have the option to use the wizard in this screen.
Thanks, Claire. And then I guess we could open it up for questions. So if you do have a question, you're more than welcome to take your mic off mute and ask it.
Yes, I do not have that option on my dashboard for expense reports. For whatever reason, I'm not seeing it at all for manage expense reports.
So you probably are not seated for an expense. I'm not sure which company that you're working with. We have a couple groups on here. You'll just want to get with your either your accounting team or your like program controls team, and then they can get you set up.
Well, I hope they do, because I've already been purchasing with a company credit card.
Do we have any other questions?
Still not clear on the attaching a receipt thing.
Okay. Let me just come back to my expense report.
I've got the same problem. You shot right into it, and I need the front end, the leading part of it. So that lost me. I'm trying to take notes, and you're already off into the end of it, and I'm still trying to figure out how you started.
Okay. You guys will have access to this video recording, as well as a user guide documentation to assist you with the overall process as well. If you are, let me just totally close out of here. So if you needed to enter a new expense report, you would come over here to the new expense report option right here. As far as the attaching of receipts goes, any item that you have claimed that requires a receipt is going to be highlighted here and will be highlighted in yellow until that receipt is attached. To attach that receipt, you're going to highlight that particular line, and then you're going to click on Attach down here, and it's going to open up another window. So you will have to have the receipt saved on your hard drive or somewhere that you can access to be able to upload that file to the system. When the wizard comes out, you'll actually be able to scan your receipts from your smartphone and then upload them directly to the expense report.
Okay, so there's a window that's not showing when you click attach on this training video. Because you put your mouse or your pointer in the middle and do a circle, but we're not seeing that, or I'm not. So there's a window that pops up, and then you can pick from your file where you've got all your receipts saved.
Yes, there's a window that's going to pop up, and it's going to have a couple of fields. It's going to have browse, and you click on that browse radio button, and then you'll be able to browse onto your hard drive to be able to find that receipt.
Okay, perfect. Got it.
Okay, you're welcome. Any other questions?
This is Krista. Just for the government services group, I'd highly recommend contacting your program controls. They have user guides that they can send out, and they've also been training in this so they can help you get through an expense report. Once you do the first couple, then it'll become pretty easy for you, but it's just that initial test. For the SCS group, you just want to get with Melinda on getting access or working through the system.